The story begins in a small, dusty town where life moved slowly, and hope often felt like a distant dream. In a narrow street lined with crumbling brick houses, lived a woman named Amina and her young son, Zayan. Amina was known in the neighborhood as the woman who never gave up, even when life gave her every reason to. Her hands were always rough from washing clothes for others, her back slightly bent from years of labor, but her eyes still carried a quiet strength. Zayan, her son, was different. He was only 12 years old, thin, with worn-out clothes and sandals that had been stitched together more times than anyone could count. But there was something about him, something people couldn't quite understand. He spoke less, observed more, and when he did speak, there was a depth in his voice that didn't belong to a child. Every evening, after Amina returned home exhausted, she would find Zayan sitting in the corner of their small room, surrounded by old books. Some were torn, some missing pages, others written in languages no one in the neighborhood could even recognize. One night, as the lantern flickered weakly, Amina sat beside him and gently placed her hand on his head. "Zayan," she said softly, "why do you spend so much time with these books? You should go outside, play with the other children." Zayan looked up at her, his eyes calm but intense. "Ami, one day I will take you away from all this. You won't have to work anymore." Amina smiled faintly, brushing his hair back. "Dreams are good, my son, but life is not always kind to dreams." Zayan didn't argue. He simply nodded and returned to his book. What Amina didn't fully understand was that her son wasn't just dreaming, he was preparing. Zayan had a gift, one that had quietly grown inside him over the years. He could understand languages. Not just one or two, but many. It started when he was very young, listening to travelers passing through town, mimicking their words, their accents. What began as curiosity slowly became something extraordinary. By the age of 12, Zayan could speak 9 languages, but in a place where survival mattered more than talent, no one cared. To the people of the town, he was just a poor woman's son, and sometimes even less than that. One day, news spread through the town like wildfire. A wealthy Arab businessman, Khalid al-Rashid, was visiting. His convoy of luxury cars rolled into the dusty streets, drawing crowds of curious onlookers. Khalid al-Rashid was known for his wealth, power, and pride. His clothes were spotless, his watch gleamed in the sunlight, and his presence alone commanded attention. The town's officials gathered to welcome him, hoping for donations, investments, anything that might bring change. Amina stood at a distance, watching, her hands still damp from work. Zayan stood beside her, his eyes fixed on the scene, not with awe but with quiet curiosity. As Khalid al-Rashid stepped out of his car, a group of local men began praising him loudly. "Sir, welcome. Our town is honored. We have many talented people here, children full of potential." Khalid al-Rashid smirked slightly, glancing around at the worn-out buildings and dusty roads. "Talented?" he repeated, his tone laced with disbelief. "In a place like this?" The crowd fell silent. That's when one of the men, eager to impress, pointed toward Zayan. "This boy, he says he can speak 9 languages." A ripple of laughter spread through the crowd. Khalid al-Rashid turned his gaze toward Zayan, raising an eyebrow. "This boy?" he said, stepping closer. 9 languages?" Zayan stood still, meeting his gaze without fear. "Yes," he replied simply. The businessman let out a short, mocking laugh. "Do you even know what you're saying, child? People spend years, decades mastering languages, and you claim 9? More laughter followed. Amina felt her heart sink. She gently pulled Zayan's arm. "Come, let's go," she whispered. "We don't need this." But Zayan didn't move. Instead, he took a small step forward. "You can test me," he said calmly. The crowd grew quieter now, curiosity replacing amusement. Khalid al-Rashid folded his arms, intrigued but still amused. "Very well," he said. "Let's see your talent." He began speaking in Arabic, his voice confident and clear. To everyone's shock, Zayan responded immediately. In fluent Arabic, the laughter stopped. Khalid al-Rashid's expression shifted slightly, but he wasn't convinced. He switched to English. Zayan replied just as smoothly. Then French, then Urdu, then Turkish. With each language, Zayan's voice remained steady, his pronunciation precise, his tone natural. The crowd watched in stunned silence. Amina covered her mouth, tears welling in her eyes. This wasn't the first time she had seen her son do this, but this time people were finally seeing him, finally hearing him. Khalid al-Rashid's smile had completely vanished. "Enough," he said, his voice quieter now, but there was something different in his eyes, not mockery, something else, something unsettled. He took a step closer to Zayan, studying him carefully. "Where did you learn all this?" he asked. Zayan hesitated for a moment, then he said softly, from books, from people, from listening, from trying, and from not giving up. The simplicity of the answer seemed to hit harder than anything else. The crowd remained silent, as if the air itself had changed. Khalid al-Rashid glanced around, then back at the boy. "You expect me to believe that?" he said. Zayan didn't respond immediately. Instead, he looked at his mother. Amina's eyes were filled with both pride and fear. And in that moment, something deeper began to unfold. Because what Zayan was about to reveal wasn't just about languages, it was about everything he had endured, everything he had hidden, and the truth that no one in that town was ready to face. And just as Zayan opened his mouth to speak again, his voice trembled for the first time, not from fear but from the weight of everything he had carried inside for so long. "I didn't just learn from books," he said quietly. The crowd leaned in as if the entire town had stopped breathing at once. Zayan's eyes drifted downward for a moment, then slowly lifted again, this time not toward Khalid al-Rashid but toward the people around him. "Every language I learned for a reason." There was a strange silence in the air now. Even the wind seemed to have paused. Khalid al-Rashid narrowed his eyes slightly. "What reason could a child like you possibly have?" Zayan swallowed hard, his fingers clenched slightly at his sides. "When my father left," he began, his voice softer now, "he didn't just leave us, he left debts. People used to come to our house every day, shouting, threatening Ammi." Amina's breath caught in her throat. She hadn't expected this. "Not here, not like this," Zayan continued, his voice steadying as if speaking the truth was giving him strength. "Some of them didn't even speak our language. They came from different places. Traders, workers, men who had given my father money." He looked at Khalid al-Rashid again. "I couldn't understand them at first. I didn't know what they were saying, but I could see the fear in my mother's eyes." Amina turned her face away, unable to hold back her tears anymore. "So I started listening," Zayan said. "I started repeating their words when they left. I would find old papers, broken books, anything I could use." His voice cracked slightly. "I just wanted to understand what they were saying, so I could protect her." The crowd shifted uncomfortably. Some lowered their gaze. Zayan took a slow breath. But then something changed. Khalid al-Rashid remained silent now, his expression unreadable. "I realized when you understand people, you can do more than just listen. You can help." A faint memory passed through Zayan's eyes. "There was a man once. He came from Turkey. He was angry, shouting. No one could calm him down. They were about to throw him out of the market." Zayan paused, his lips tightening slightly. "I spoke to him. In his language, just a few words." He looked around. He stopped shouting. The crowd exchanged glances. "He told me he wasn't angry. He was scared. He had been cheated, and no one would listen to him because they didn't understand him." Zayan's voice softened. "I helped him explain, and the problem was solved." A long silence followed. "That day," Zayan continued, "I realized language is not just words. It's people's pain, their fear, their truth." Amina closed her eyes, tears silently rolling down her cheeks. Khalid al-Rashid slowly uncrossed his arms. There was no trace of mockery left in his face now. "Since then," Zayan said, "I started helping others, travelers, workers, anyone who couldn't speak, anyone who wasn't being heard." He looked directly into Khalid al-Rashid's eyes. "But no one ever asked me how I learned. They only laughed when they heard how many languages I could speak." The words hung in the air like a quiet storm. A man from the crowd whispered, almost to himself, "We thought he was just making things up." Another voice murmured, "We never even tried to listen." Khalid al-Rashid took a step closer now, his gaze fixed on Zayan, not as a curiosity but as something far more serious. "You're saying," he said slowly, "that you taught yourself all of this just to survive?" Zayan shook his head gently. "No," he said, "not just to survive." He glanced at his mother again, to make sure she didn't have to suffer alone. Amina broke down completely at those words, covering her face as quiet sobs escaped her. For a moment, no one spoke. The weight of the truth had settled deeply into every heart present. Khalid al-Rashid exhaled slowly, something heavy shifting inside him. For years, he had built his life on power, control, and pride. He had met scholars, businessmen, leaders, but never had he stood before a child like this, a child who had turned pain into purpose, a child who had learned not for status but for love. You said 9 languages, Khalid al-Rashid said quietly. Zayan nodded. Khalid al-Rashid's eyes narrowed slightly, not in doubt but in thought. Then tell me this, he said. If you understand people so well. He stepped even closer, lowering his voice. What do you understand about me? The question struck the air like a sudden thunderclap. The crowd stiffened. Amina looked up in alarm. Zayan, she whispered nervously. But Zayan didn't step back. He didn't hesitate. He studied Khalid al-Rashid's face. Not his clothes, not his status, but his eyes. For a few long seconds, the world seemed to disappear around them. And then Zayan spoke. You're not angry, he said softly. Khalid al-Rashid's expression didn't change, but something flickered, just for a moment. You're tired. A faint murmur spread through the crowd. Zayan continued, his voice calm but piercing. You've spent your whole life proving yourself, building everything, earning respect, making sure no one ever sees you as weak. Khalid al-Rashid's jaw tightened slightly. But, Zayan said, you don't trust anyone. The silence deepened. You think people only come to you for your money, your power, not for who you are. Khalid al-Rashid's breathing slowed. And that's why you laughed at me, Zayan finished. Because it's easier to doubt others than to believe in something real. No one dared to speak. Even the wind felt heavy now. Khalid al-Rashid stood completely still. For the first time in years, someone had seen through him. Not his wealth, not his authority, him. His eyes shifted slightly, as if searching for something to hold on to. But there was nothing, only truth. A truth spoken by a boy the world had ignored. Amina watched in disbelief, her heart pounding. She had always known her son was special, but this was something else. Khalid al-Rashid slowly lowered his gaze, just for a second. And when he looked up again, his eyes were no longer the same. There was no pride in them now, no arrogance, only something fragile, something human. And as he opened his mouth to respond, no words came out. For a man like Khalid al-Rashid, someone who had spent his entire life commanding rooms, controlling conversations and never once losing his composure, this silence was louder than anything he had ever said. His lips parted slightly, then closed again. The boy in front of him had done something no one else ever had. He had stripped away the armor. The crowd stood frozen, watching closely. No one dared interrupt this moment. Zayan didn't move. He didn't look away. But there was no challenge in his eyes, only quiet understanding. Khalid al-Rashid finally exhaled a long, heavy breath, as if he had been holding it for years. You speak like someone who has lived a lifetime, he said, his voice lower now, calmer, almost unfamiliar. Zayn replied gently, sometimes life doesn't wait for you to grow up. Those words landed softly, but they carried a weight that settled deep into the chest of everyone listening. Khalid al-Rashid looked away for a moment, scanning the dusty street, the broken houses, the worn faces of the people who had gathered around him. For the first time since he arrived, he wasn't seeing poverty as a statistic. He was seeing stories, pain, survival, and right in front of him stood a boy who had turned all of it into something powerful. He looked back at Zayn. Tell me something, he said slowly. If you understand so much, if you've helped so many people. His eyes narrowed slightly, not with suspicion but with curiosity. Why are you still here? The question lingered. Zayn's gaze softened. Because she is here, he said, nodding gently toward Amina. Amina's heart trembled. I can't leave her, Zayn continued. Not until I know she won't have to struggle anymore. A quiet murmur spread through the crowd again. Some wiped their eyes discreetly. Khalid al-Rashid followed Zayn's gaze toward Amina. For the first time he truly looked at her. Not as part of the background, not as just another poor woman. He saw her trembling hands, her tired eyes, the dignity she still held on to despite everything. He took a slow step toward her. Amina instinctively stepped back, lowering her gaze. Sir, we didn't mean any disrespect, she said nervously. He's just a child. He speaks without thinking sometimes. Stop, Khalid al-Rashid said gently. The softness in his voice startled her. She looked up confused. You raised him, he said. That is not something small. Amina blinked, unsure how to respond. She struggled to find words. I only did what any mother would do. Khalid al-Rashid shook his head slightly. No, he said quietly. Not everyone could raise a child like him, in circumstances like yours. The sincerity in his tone made the air feel different. Amina's eyes filled with tears again. But this time, they weren't from pain. They were from being seen, from being acknowledged, something she hadn't felt in years. Khalid al-Rashid turned back to Zayan. You said you learned languages to protect her, to help others, he said. Zayan nodded. Khalid al-Rashid paused, then asked, "And what do you want for yourself?" The question caught Zayan off guard. For a moment he didn't answer, because no one had ever asked him that before. Not like this, not seriously. He looked down thinking, then slowly he spoke. "I want..." His voice softened. "I want a place where people don't feel helpless just because they can't be understood." The crowd listened closely. "I want to help people talk to each other, to solve things, before they turn into pain." He looked up again. "And I want my mother to rest." Amina let out a quiet sob, unable to hold back anymore. Khalid al-Rashid stood very still. Each word the boy spoke felt simple, but carried a depth that couldn't be ignored. For years Khalid had invested in businesses, properties, industries. He had measured value in numbers. But now, standing here, he was faced with something that couldn't be measured: potential, purpose, humanity. He turned slightly, signaling one of the men from his team to step forward. The man approached quickly, holding a tablet, ready to take instructions. But Khalid al-Rashid didn't speak immediately. He kept his eyes on Zayan. "You said 9 languages," he repeated softly. Zayan nodded. Khalid al-Rashid's gaze sharpened slightly. "Then there is one more I want to hear," he said. Zayan tilted his head slightly. "Which one?" Khalid al-Rashid paused, then said quietly, "The language of truth, when it costs you something." The crowd fell silent again. Zayan frowned slightly, trying to understand. Khalid al-Rashid stepped closer. "If I take you away from here, give you education, opportunity, a life beyond this place..." Amina's breath stopped. "Would you still come back?" The question hit like a sudden storm. Zayan's eyes widened slightly. Amina looked at him in fear and hope, all at once. The entire crowd leaned in, waiting. Because this wasn't just an offer, it was a turning point, a choice that could change everything. Zayan looked at his mother. Her eyes were filled with tears, but there was something else there too: fear of losing him. He turned back to Khalid al-Rashid. For a long moment he said nothing, and then quietly, honestly, "I don't know." A ripple of surprise moved through the crowd. Khalid al-Rashid didn't react immediately, but Zayan continued. "I want to say yes," he said, "because I want to learn, I want to grow, I want to become stronger." His voice trembled slightly. "But I also want to say no, because I don't want her to be alone again." Amina covered her mouth, tears streaming down her face. The raw honesty of his answer cut deeper than anything else he had said. He wasn't trying to impress. He wasn't trying to win. He was just telling the truth. Khalid al-Rashid closed his eyes for a brief moment, and when he opened them again, there was clarity in them, a decision forming, not just about the boy but about himself, about the kind of man he wanted to be. From this moment forward, he turned to his team again, but this time there was no hesitation in his voice. "Prepare everything," he said. The man nodded quickly. "Yes, sir." "For the boy?" Khalid al-Rashid shook his head slowly. "No," he said. There was a pause, and then with quiet certainty, "For both of them." The words echoed through the street like something unreal. Amina froze. Zayan's eyes widened. The crowd erupted into whispers, disbelief spreading like wildfire. But Khalid al-Rashid wasn't finished. He stepped closer to Zayan one more time. "This is not charity," he said firmly. Zayan listened carefully. "This is an investment in truth." He extended his hand down as a businessman, not as a man of power, but as someone who had finally recognized something greater than himself. And as Zayan looked at that hand, the weight of the moment settled deep within him, because this wasn't just about leaving, it was about stepping into a future he had never imagined. And as he slowly began to raise his hand to respond, his fingers trembled slightly, not from fear of the man standing before him, but from the weight of everything this moment carried. He looked at Khalid al-Rashid's outstretched hand. Then slowly he turned his head toward Amina. Time seemed to slow down. Amina stood there, her eyes filled with tears, her hands pressed tightly against each other, as if she were holding her heart in place. She didn't say a word, but in her silence there was a storm of emotions: fear of losing her son, hope that he might finally have a life she could never give him, pride so deep it almost hurt. Zayan took a small step toward her. "Ami," he whispered. Amina shook her head gently, tears falling freely now. "No, don't ask me," she said, her voice breaking. "If I speak, I will only hold you back." Zayan's chest tightened. "I don't want to leave you," he said, his voice trembling now for the first time like a child again. Amina stepped closer, placing her trembling hands on his face. "You are not leaving me," she said softly. "You are rising, and I will be right here, in every step you take." Zion closed his eyes, leaning into her touch. "I'm afraid," he admitted. Amina smiled through her tears. "So was I, the day you were born," she said. "But you still came into this world, and you changed mine." For a moment, they just stood there, holding on to each other, as if trying to memorize this feeling, this closeness, this life they had shared through struggle. Then slowly, gently, Amina took his hand and placed it forward toward Khalid al-Rashid. Zion opened his eyes, and this time, there was no hesitation. He reached out and took Khalid al-Rashid's hand. A quiet gasp spread through the crowd. But this was not the end of a story. It was the beginning of something no one in that town had ever seen before. Days passed. For the first time in years, Amina didn't wake up before sunrise to wash clothes for others. Instead, she sat by a window in a modest but clean home provided for her, watching her son prepare for a journey that felt both unreal and long overdue. Zion stood in front of a mirror, wearing clothes that actually fit him, but his eyes were still the same, still humble, still deep, still carrying the echoes of everything he had lived through. "Ammi," he said softly, adjusting his sleeve. "Does this look okay?" Amina smiled, her heart swelling. "You look like someone the world has been waiting for," she replied. Zion chuckled lightly, shaking his head. "I'm still the same," he said. Amina stood up and walked toward him. "No," she said gently. "You are the same, but now the world will finally see you." A knock came at the door. One of Khalid al-Rashid's men stood outside. "It's time," he said respectfully. Zion took a deep breath. He turned to Amina one last time. "I will come back," he said. Amina nodded, placing her hand over his heart. "I know," she whispered, "because this is where you belong." Zion stepped forward, then paused. He looked around the room, simple, quiet, but filled with memories. This was where he had learned, struggled, dreamed. He closed his eyes for a brief second, then opened them again, stronger, and without looking back, he stepped outside. Months turned into a year. The boy who once stood barefoot in a dusty street now stood on stages. He spoke in languages that connected people who once couldn't understand each other. He worked with organizations, helped resolve conflicts, translated not just words, but emotions. And everywhere he went, people listened. Not because he was powerful, but because he was real. Because every word he spoke came from truth. Khalid al-Rashid watched all of this from a distance, not as a man showing off an investment, but as someone quietly learning that greatness doesn't come from wealth, it comes from purpose. And Amina? She would sit by that same window every evening, holding a small phone in her hands, waiting. And every night, without fail, it would ring. "Ami," Zion's voice would come through, warm and familiar. And no matter where he was in the world, he always spoke to her in the same language, the language of love. One evening, after a long day, Zion stood before a large audience, people from different countries, different backgrounds, all gathered to hear him speak. He paused for a moment, looking at the crowd. Then he smiled softly. "I was once told," he began, "that a poor boy could not possibly speak 9 languages. A few people in the audience smiled. But the truth is, it was never about the languages." He took a slow breath. It was about being heard and making sure others are heard too. The room fell silent. No matter where you come from, no matter how small your beginnings may seem, your voice matters. He paused again, his eyes softening. "And sometimes the world laughs at you, not because you are wrong, but because it has not yet realized how powerful your truth is." A quiet wave of emotion spread through the audience. "And when that moment comes," Zion said gently, "don't stop. Keep speaking, keep learning, keep believing. Because one day, the same world that doubted you will stand in silence, listening." If this story touched your heart, if you felt even a small part of Zion's journey within yourself, then don't keep it to yourself. Share your thoughts. Tell me, have you ever been underestimated? Have you ever carried a dream that no one believed in? Write it down, because your story might be the one someone else needs to hear today.